They didn't stop the music. They didn't cut the stream. In a glass-lit promotion party at Northvale Systems with cameras rolling and champagne raised, Ryan Whitmore struck his wife in front of executives, employees, and thousands watching live. Some guests laughed nervously. Others lifted their phones. No one intervened. Kayla Garcia didn't scream. She didn't argue. She didn't leave. She stood still as the room absorbed the moment, unaware that a decision already signed was about to make the violence irrelevant. Seconds later, HR stepped forward. Stay with this story until the end. If you believe silence is not weakness, and that evidence outlasts cruelty, this is for you. Tell us where you're watching from and your local time in the comments. And if stories of quiet strength and legal justice matter to you, consider subscribing. Before the cameras, before the bruises that would later be cataloged with dates and angles, Kayla Garcia had already learned how to disappear in plain sight. At Northvale Systems, she was known, if she was known at all, as Ryan Whitmore's wife. The title carried a polite invisibility. People nodded to her in elevators, smiled at her across conference rooms, and then looked past her as if she were part of the furniture. Kayla accepted that. She cultivated it. In a building that rewarded volume and certainty, her quiet registered as harmless. She dressed neutrally. She arrived early and left without ceremony. She asked questions only when the answers mattered, and even then, she asked them softly. What she did not do was improvise. Every day followed a pattern, and every pattern left a trace. Kayla kept records the way some people kept journals. Not confessions or feelings timestamps, dates, screenshots, the names of witnesses who didn't yet know they were witnesses. She never wrote in anger. She waited for calm, because calm made memory accurate. Ryan, by contrast, lived loudly. He had mastered the cadence of confidence, the upward inflection that suggested momentum even when facts lagged behind. In meetings, he spoke as if the outcome had already been decided, and everyone else was simply catching up. It worked more often than it should have. Executives leaned forward when he talked. Junior managers repeated his phrases as if they were slogans. At home, the performance shifted, but never disappeared. Ryan needed an audience. When he didn't get one, the silence irritated him. It hadn't begun with violence. It never did. It began with corrections, how Kayla spoke, how she stood, how she smiled at the wrong person for half a second too long. Then came the jokes framed as concern. "I'm just trying to help you," he would say in front of friends. "You don't always read the room." Kayla learned to read the room better than anyone. She learned when to nod, when to pause, when to retreat into herself, and wait for the moment to pass. She learned that resistance provoked lectures, and lectures were often followed by apologies that felt rehearsed. The apologies always came with conditions. She did not tell anyone what was happening, not because she believed it was normal, but because she understood escalation. Ryan's anger was tied to control. Losing control publicly, professionally, terrified him. Kayla stored that knowledge away. She did not weaponize it. She prepared. The first time she went to a doctor, she said she had slipped on the stairs. The second time, she said she had bumped into a door. The third time, the physician looked at her differently and asked questions that were careful and precise. Kayla answered them just as carefully. She did not ask for help. She asked for documentation. By the time Northvale's CEO announced his intention to step down, Kayla had already spoken quietly, privately with Michael Rowan, the company's general counsel. The meeting took place in a small office with frosted glass, the kind designed for conversations that were not meant to echo. Michael did not ask her why she was there. He asked her what she needed. "I need to understand the process," Kayla said, "not the headlines." The process. Michael explained the mechanics without judgment. Succession planning, interim leadership, board votes, authority chains. Kayla listened, asked clarifying questions, and took notes that did not betray emotion. When the meeting ended, she thanked him and left without promises. What Michael did not know, what no one at Northvale knew, was that Kayla already held a form of authority that did not announce itself. Months earlier, a restructuring agreement had passed quietly through the legal review. It was the kind of document executives skimmed and assistants filed. It transferred conditional signing power in the event of a governance deadlock. Kayla's name appeared once in a clause most people never reached. She had not sought that power. It had been offered to her as a technical solution, a neutral safeguard. She had accepted it without comment. Ryan assumed the company's future was his. The assumption showed in the way he walked through the building, the way he spoke to Laura Bennett in HR, the way he joked about when I'm running this place. No one corrected him. Correcting him would have been awkward, and awkwardness was something people avoided around Ryan. At home, his confidence curdled into impatience. He drank more, he slept less. The apologies became shorter, the lectures longer. Kayla noticed the pattern tightening the way it always did before a breaking point. She did not flinch when he mocked her at dinners. She did not respond when he checked her phone under the guise of trust. She did not ask permission to leave, but she did inform him, always in neutral language, always in writing. On the night Northvale scheduled the promotion party, Kayla packed a small folder and placed it in her bag. Inside were printouts she hoped not to need: medical records, server logs, a list of internal policy codes. She added her phone charger and an extra battery pack. She checked that her cloud backups were current. Ryan barely noticed. He was rehearsing his speech in the mirror, adjusting his tie, smiling at his own reflection as if it were already applauding. "You should stand closer tonight," he told her. "People like optics." Kayla nodded. She had already planned where she would stand. Not for optics, but for angles. She knew where the cameras would be positioned, where the lighting would fall, which microphones would be live. She had watched the setup earlier that afternoon under the pretense of curiosity. As they left the house, Kayla sent one final email. It was brief. It contained no accusations, only instructions. It was scheduled to deliver if certain conditions were met. She did not reread it. She had written it days ago, when her hands were steady. In the car, Ryan talked about loyalty, about how companies rewarded people who showed strength, about how embarrassment was weakness. Kayla watched the city lights slide past the window and said nothing. She did not need to argue with him. The system he trusted more than any person was already awake, already recording. She understood something Ryan never had, that power did not announce itself with raised voices or clenched fists. It moved through paperwork, through procedures, through rooms where no one clapped. And it waited. If anyone had asked Kayla Garcia why she stayed, she would not have answered with love, fear, or hope. Those were easy explanations, and easy explanations were rarely accurate. The truth was quieter and more deliberate. She stayed because leaving without preparation would have cost her more than it saved. Ryan Whitmore's control did not rely on brute force alone. It relied on uncertainty, on the constant suggestion that any attempt to resist would end badly. He controlled money by managing access. He controlled narrative by speaking first and loudest. He controlled space by deciding who belonged where. When Kayla understood that she stopped reacting and started observing, Ryan preferred public confidence and private domination. In front of others, he framed himself as generous, demanding only excellence. In private, he framed his anger as disappointment, his threats as concern. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he would say, as if the problem were inefficiency rather than cruelty. Kayla learned not to correct him. Correction escalated things. Silence paired with documentation did not. She stopped arguing details and started recording outcomes. When he locked her out of accounts by accident, she noted the date and the email thread that followed. When he raised his voice in the kitchen and then apologized before bed, she saved the voicemail. When he grabbed her arm hard enough to leave marks, she photographed them in consistent lighting from multiple angles with a neutral background. She did not store these files on her phone alone. She understood risk. Everything was duplicated, encrypted, time-stamped. The cloud account was in her name only. The passwords were not memorable. Ryan assumed her compliance meant submission. That assumption made him careless. He began to test boundaries publicly. Small humiliations, first interrupting her mid-sentence, correcting her mistakes in front of colleagues, joking about how she overthought everything. People laughed politely. Kayla smiled, nodded, and watched who laughed too quickly. She noticed patterns. The same 3 executives always laughed. 2 looked away. 1 said nothing, but remembered everything. At North Vale Systems, Kayla's presence remained peripheral. She attended events without a title. She was invited to dinners, but not meetings. That suited her. Meetings generated minutes. Dinners generated assumptions. Assumptions were useful. Ryan liked to tell stories about their marriage, always with himself as the patient guide, and Kayla as the anxious learner. He framed her quiet as gratitude. He framed her absence as trust. What he never noticed was how often Kayla was asked questions by people who did not ask him anything. Not about strategy or performance, but about process. How does this usually work? Someone would ask casually. Kayla would answer just enough to be helpful, never enough to alarm. She did not build alliances. She built clarity. The night Ryan shoved her against the hallway wall, the one he later described as a misunderstanding, Kayla did not cry. She waited until the house was quiet, then opened her laptop and wrote a timeline. She included the weather, the time, the words he used, the fact that he checked his phone afterward and went to bed without looking at her. The next morning, she went to work as usual. She met Michael Rowan for coffee, not in the office, but in a public place with neutral seating and no interruptions. She placed a folder between them, but did not open it. "I'm not asking you to do anything," she said. "I'm asking you to tell me what happens if I do." Michael listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he asked 2 questions. They were not about emotions or motives. They were about jurisdiction and liability. Kayla answered honestly. From that point on, the boundaries shifted. Not visibly, but structurally. Michael ensured that any communication involving Kayla and company governance included appropriate counsel. Laura Bennett in HR quietly updated procedural safeguards. Daniel Price began keeping parallel records, not because he suspected fraud yet, but because something about Ryan's expense approvals felt rushed. Ryan mistook the tightening circle for success. He talked openly about the CEO role as if it were a formality. He drank to celebrate before there was anything to celebrate. He stopped apologizing altogether. At home, the atmosphere grew brittle. Ryan no longer pretended to listen. He made decisions and expected compliance. When Kayla disagreed, he accused her of undermining him. When she said nothing, he accused her of judging him. She let him believe that. Judgment implied moral authority. Kayla was not interested in judgment. She was interested in proof. She began to write less in her personal notes and more in structured formats, lists, tables, cross-references. She labeled files the way auditors did, not the way victims did. She thought about how someone else would read her records years later without knowing her, without caring about her story. She also began to prepare for absence. She memorized account numbers. She made copies of documents she might need to access quickly. She set alerts for unusual financial activity, not because she planned to accuse Ryan, but because surprises favored him, not her. Ryan noticed her calm and mistook it for surrender. "You're finally learning," he said once, smiling, as if he were generous. "This is what partnership looks like." Kayla nodded. She had learned something, but not what he meant. When North Vale announced the promotion party, Ryan treated it as confirmation. He practiced his speech for days. He invited people Kayla had never met. He insisted she wear a specific dress stand in a specific place, smile at specific moments. Kayla agreed without comment. She did not argue over clothes or posture. Those were surface details. The structure beneath them was already shifting. In the week leading up to the event, she noticed Ryan's temper shortening. He snapped at drivers, at waitstaff, at colleagues who disagreed with him. He slept poorly. He drank more openly. The signs were familiar. She recognized the rhythm. The night before the party, Kayla sent herself an email with the subject line, "If needed." It contained nothing emotional, only links and instructions. She did not expect to use it. She prepared it anyway. On the morning of the event, she woke early and reviewed her checklist. Phone charged, backups verified, folder packed. She ate breakfast slowly, not because she was calm, but because rushing introduced errors. Ryan barely spoke to her. He was already performing, imagining applause. When he did speak, it was to remind her not to embarrass him. "I won't," Kayla said. She meant it in a way he could not hear. By the time they arrived at Northvale's headquarters, the building was already alive with anticipation. Cameras were being tested, microphones adjusted. Employees gathered in clusters, buzzing with speculation. Kayla took in the scene with practiced attention. She noted exits. She noted security placement. She noted who looked at Ryan and who looked at her. She stood where he told her to stand. She waited. Northvale Systems had been preparing for a transition long before Ryan Whitmore began rehearsing his victory speeches. The outgoing CEO, Thomas Keller, announced his intention to step down quietly, citing strategic realignment and long-term planning. The press release was bland, designed to soothe investors rather than inform them. Inside the company, however, the announcement triggered a series of meetings that were anything but ceremonial. Succession at Northvale was not decided by charisma or ambition. It was decided by documents, by bylaws, amended years earlier, by voting thresholds buried in footnotes, by contingencies no one paid attention to until they mattered. Ryan paid attention only to the visible parts. He tracked who congratulated him first, who hinted that they would support him, who stopped by his office with knowing smiles. He mistook access for authority and volume for inevitability. Kayla understood the difference. She learned about the first closed-door board meeting, not because someone told her, but because the building's rhythm changed. Security protocols tightened. Calendars blocked out time with vague labels. Laura Bennett in HR stopped answering certain questions directly and began routing them through legal. Kayla did not push. She observed. Michael Rowan invited her to another meeting 2 days after the announcement. This one took place in a conference room with no windows and a table too large for the number of people present. Michael was joined by Daniel Price, the CFO, who looked uncomfortable in the way of someone who had realized he knew more than he wanted to. Michael spoke first. "This isn't about Ryan," he said. "Not yet." Kayla nodded. She hadn't expected it to be. He explained the situation with clinical precision. The board was divided. Some members favored continuity. Others wanted distance from the current leadership entirely. The company's recent financial performance was stable but fragile. Investor confidence depended on the perception of control. Daniel slid a folder across the table. Inside were projections, risk assessments, and a timeline that stretched back months. Kayla read without comment. "What role do you see for me?" she asked when she finished. Michael did not answer immediately. He looked at her carefully, as if measuring not her intelligence, but her restraint. "Technically," he said, "you already have one." He explained the clause she had reviewed months earlier, the one that most people had ignored. In the event of a deadlock, a designated signatory could authorize interim leadership to stabilize operations while the board reached consensus. The clause was legal, obscure, and effective. Kayla's name was on it. She did not react. She had known this would surface eventually. She had not known when. "This doesn't make you permanent, CEO," Daniel added quickly, as if worried about her reaction. "It makes you the solution to a problem." Kayla appreciated the clarity. "How long would it last?" she asked. "As long as necessary," Michael said. "Or as long as you choose." Kayla closed the folder. "Then we wait," she said, "until there's no alternative." Ryan was not mentioned again in the meeting, not because he was irrelevant, but because he was predictable. His supporters were loud. His detractors were quiet. The board knew both camps existed. What they did not yet know was which one would collapse first. Outside that room, Ryan continued campaigning. He invited board members to private dinners. He framed conversations around loyalty and vision. He spoke about culture as if it were a brand slogan rather than a system of behavior. He promised decisiveness and speed, two things investors liked to hear when they were nervous. Kayla attended some of those dinners. She listened while Ryan spoke. She watched faces while he made jokes. She noted when people smiled and when they checked their phones. She noticed who asked questions and who avoided them. She did not interrupt. She did not correct him when he exaggerated his influence or minimized risks. Letting him speak freely was safer. He revealed more that way. At home, Ryan's confidence turned brittle. He began treating Kayla's silence as provocation. "You don't seem excited," he said one evening, pacing the living room. "This is good for us." Kayla folded laundry without looking at him. "I'm excited," she said evenly, for what he demanded. "For clarity," she replied. He laughed, sharp and dismissive. "You always talk like that, like you're above it." She said nothing. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frames on the wall. Kayla waited until the house was quiet, then wrote down the time. At North Vale, the board met again. And again. Each meeting ended without a decision. The deadlock hardened. Daniel Price began seeing things he could not ignore. Expense reports approved too quickly. Vendor relationships that made no financial sense. Travel reimbursements tied to personal events. He did not accuse Ryan. He simply documented. Laura Bennett updated internal policies, citing best practices. She scheduled training sessions on workplace conduct and leadership accountability. Ryan joked about them in meetings, calling them optics. Kayla watched Laura closely. Laura was not Kayla's ally, but she was not Ryan's either. She was loyal to process. Process Kayla knew could be trusted to do what people would not. As the promotion party approached, the board still had no consensus. Investors were restless. Analysts were beginning to ask questions. The absence of a named successor was becoming a story. Michael Rowan sent Kayla a short message late one night. "Be ready." Kayla did not reply. She did not need to. Ryan took the scheduling of the party as confirmation that the board was merely stalling for formality. He interpreted the silence as respect. He began referring to the role as his not in private, but in semi-public conversations. "This time next week," he told a colleague, raising a glass, "things will look very different." Kayla heard him say it. She made no comment. The night before the party, the board convened one final time. The vote deadlocked exactly as Michael had predicted. The clause was triggered. At 11:47 p.m., Michael drafted the authorization. At 11:52, it was reviewed. At 11:58, it was signed. Kayla's phone buzzed once. She read the message, closed her eyes briefly, and placed the phone face down on the table. There was no relief, no triumph, only confirmation. The power Ryan wanted had not been taken from him. It had simply moved around him quietly while he was busy celebrating a future that no longer existed. By morning, everything was in place. Ryan woke convinced the day belonged to him. Kayla woke knowing it did not. Violence did not enter Kayla Garcia's marriage with a sound loud enough to warn anyone. It arrived gradually disguised as pressure, impatience, correction. By the time it left marks, the environment around those marks had already been conditioned to explain them away. Ryan Whitmore did not wake up one day and decide to hurt her. He woke up believing he was entitled to obedience, to admiration, to a life that bent smoothly around his ambitions. When reality resisted, he took it personally. When Kayla did not move fast enough to accommodate him, he interpreted it as defiance. The first incident that crossed a line happened in a kitchen that still smelled like coffee. Ryan was late for a meeting. Kayla had asked a question, nothing confrontational, nothing emotional, just a clarification about travel plans. Ryan's hand hit the counter hard enough to crack the wood. "Don't start," he said, voice low. "Not today." Kayla said nothing. She learned early that silence shortened the moment. But when she turned away, he grabbed her wrist, not violently, not dramatically, just tight enough to hurt. tight enough to communicate something unspoken. He released her almost immediately, as if surprised by his own strength. He apologized an hour later. He brought flowers that evening. He blamed stress. Kayla noted the date. As Ryan's influence at Northvale grew, so did his volatility at home. Promotions did not make him calmer. They made him sharper. Every perceived challenge felt larger, more threatening. Every mistake, real or imagined, felt intolerable. Kayla adapted without announcing it. She rearranged her routine so she was rarely caught off guard. She learned to anticipate moods by the way Ryan closed doors, by how quickly he finished his sentences. She learned when to speak and when to let the silence do the work. She also began to understand something essential. Ryan's behavior followed a predictable escalation curve. Pressure at work translated into tension at home. Public praise translated into private entitlement. And entitlement, when challenged, became force. The second time she went to the doctor, she did not invent a story as carefully. She simply said she had fallen. The doctor's questions became more pointed. Kayla answered them precisely. She did not ask what the doctor suspected. She asked what would be recorded. The third time, the doctor stopped pretending. She explained resources. She asked if Kayla felt safe. Kayla thanked her and asked for copies of the visit summary. It was not that Kayla did not feel fear. She did. Fear sharpened her attention. What she refused was panic. Panic shortened timelines. Panic made mistakes. She contacted Michael Rowan again, this time through a secure channel he had suggested after their first meeting. She did not describe Ryan in emotional terms. She described incidents, frequency, severity, patterns. Michael listened the way lawyers did when they were already thinking 3 steps ahead. When she finished, he asked, "What outcome do you want?" Kayla did not hesitate. "I want this to end," she said, "and I don't want him to be able to say it didn't happen." Michael nodded. He explained options without judgment: protective orders, documentation standards, corporate reporting thresholds. He did not push her toward any single path. He gave her tools. From that point on, Kayla's preparation became more deliberate. She stopped thinking of evidence as something she might need someday, and started thinking of it as a structure she was already building. She documented injuries consistently. She saved text messages even when they were mundane, because context mattered. She recorded voicemails not for their words, but for their tone. She backed everything up twice. Ryan did not notice. He believed that control meant awareness. He believed that because he knew where Kayla was, most of the time, he knew what she was doing. He did not consider that observation and submission were not the same thing. At work, his impatience grew more visible. He interrupted colleagues. He dismissed concerns. He treated disagreement as betrayal. The closer he came to the position he wanted, the less tolerance he had for friction. Kayla watched this shift carefully. It told her something important. Ryan was approaching a breaking point. The curve was steepening. The night he shoved her into the bedroom door, the sound echoed through the house. He froze afterward, as if realizing too late that something irreversible had happened. Kayla slid down the wall slowly, not because she was weak, but because she needed to sit. Ryan apologized immediately. Too immediately. He cried. He blamed alcohol. He blamed pressure. He promised therapy. He promised change. Kayla listened without reacting. She waited until he left the room. Then she took photographs. She wrote notes. She uploaded files. She slept in the guest room that night and locked the door. Ryan did not protest. He seemed relieved to retreat from the consequences of what he had done. The next morning, Kayla went to work as usual. She wore a long-sleeved blouse. No one commented. No one asked. She met Daniel Price for coffee later that week. The meeting had nothing to do with Ryan, at least not on the surface. Daniel talked about budget cycles and audit schedules. Kayla listened and asked neutral questions. At one point, Daniel paused and said, "You have a way of asking things that makes people check their numbers." Kayla smiled faintly. "I like things that add up," she said. The violence at home and the instability at work began to mirror each other. As Ryan's grip on certainty loosened professionally, his need for control at home intensified. He became suspicious accusatory. He demanded reassurances he could not accept. "You're acting different," he told her one night. "You think you're smarter than me." Kayla looked at him steadily. "I think I'm careful," she said. He laughed, sharp and humorless. "Careful doesn't win." Kayla did not correct him. Winning was not her objective. Ending was. When the promotion party was announced, Kayla recognized it as a pressure test. Public validation had always calmed Ryan temporarily. But this time, the stakes were higher, the audience larger, the expectations sharper. She prepared accordingly. She reviewed Northvale's workplace conduct policies. She reread the sections on violence harassment and executive accountability. She memorized the language. Words mattered. Precise words mattered more. She also reviewed her own timeline. She noted the escalation points. She asked herself one question repeatedly: if this happens again, where will it happen? The answer was obvious. Ryan's need to perform would not tolerate restraint. If he lost control, it would be in front of people. Cameras did not make him cautious. They made him reckless. The night before the party, Kayla slept lightly, not because she was anxious, but because she was alert. She woke before her alarm and reviewed her checklist one last time. Phone charged, backups verified, folder packed. Ryan barely noticed her movements. He was already somewhere else on stage, being applauded, receiving the recognition he believed he deserved. As they left the house, Kayla locked the door behind them with more intention than usual. She did not know exactly how the night would end. She only knew it would not continue. The promotion party was designed to feel inevitable. Northvale Systems transformed its headquarters into a stage that evening glass walls washed in light. The company logo projected high and crisp, the kind of visual confidence meant to reassure investors and flatter egos. The catering was precise, the music unobtrusive, the camera angles rehearsed. Nothing was left to chance except the people. Kayla Garcia arrived early as she always did. She moved through the space with a practiced calm, noting details most guests ignored. The placement of the main camera near the atrium. The smaller backup units positioned along the perimeter. The wireless microphones clipped to lapels and dresses, each with a faint red indicator that meant live. The security desk had been relocated closer to the stage, an optics decision, not a safety one. Ryan Whitmore arrived 20 minutes later, energized by anticipation. He shook hands, accepted congratulations that assumed an outcome not yet announced, and laughed loudly enough to be heard across the room. He did not look at Kayla at first. When he did, it was with the proprietary glance of someone checking a reflection. "You're standing too far back," he said quietly, already smiling at someone else. "Come closer. This matters." Kayla stepped forward without comment. She took the position he indicated, not because he told her to, but because it aligned with the camera's field of view. The lighting caught her face evenly. She adjusted nothing. Megan Shaw, the evening's host, ran through cues with the production team. Her voice was bright, professional, untroubled. She reminded guests that the event was being streamed to remote offices and partners. She reminded them to smile. Ryan loved reminders like that. He straightened his jacket, checked his tie in the reflective surface of a pillar, and accepted another drink. He had been drinking since late afternoon, not enough to slur, enough to loosen. Kayla declined alcohol. She held a glass of water and kept it untouched. The room filled. Executives clustered near the stage. Employees lingered along the edges, phones already out. The mood was expectant, buoyant, the way it often was, just before disappointment or spectacle. Laura Bennett stood near the side entrance, speaking quietly with Michael Rowan. She held a slim folder against her chest. Her expression was neutral, professional. She did not look at Ryan. Daniel Price arrived and positioned himself near the back, where he could see the entire room. His posture was tense, not with fear, but with anticipation. He checked his watch once, then stopped. Megan took the stage. The music softened. Applause rippled through the room and into the microphones. "Thank you all for being here," Megan said, her voice carried smoothly through the speakers. "Tonight is about leadership growth and what comes next for North Vale Systems." Ryan smiled broadly. He raised his glass slightly, already rehearsing his expression for the camera. Megan spoke about the company's achievements, its resilience, its future. She named departments. She thanked partners. She spoke about transition in careful, non-committal terms. The word promotion was used without specifics. It hung in the air like a promise. Ryan shifted his weight, impatient. When Megan invited him to speak, the applause was louder. It always was when he spoke. Ryan thrived on attention the way some people thrived on certainty. He stepped onto the stage with confidence that bordered on relief. He thanked the board, the outgoing CEO, as mentors. He spoke about vision and execution. He spoke about pressure as if it were a badge of honor. The crowd nodded, some out of agreement, some out of habit. Then he gestured toward Kayla. "And of course," he said, smiling broadly, "none of this would be possible without my wife. She keeps me grounded, keeps me from overthinking." He laughed. "Or maybe she's the one who overthinks." There was laughter, polite, uneven. Kayla met the camera's gaze briefly, then looked away. She felt the familiar tightening in her chest, not fear, not anger, but recognition. This was the tone shift she had anticipated. The beginning of the slide. Ryan continued, emboldened. He made another joke, this one sharper. He framed Kayla as cautious, anxious, the counterweight to his decisiveness. The laughter thinned. A few people shifted uncomfortably. "Come on," he said, turning toward her. "Say something. Don't just stand there." Kayla remained silent. The silence irritated him. It always did. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage, lowering his voice, as if confiding in the room. "You see," he said, "this is what I deal with." Something in his posture changed. Kayla saw it before anyone else did, the tightening of the jaw, the impatience sharpening into something else. The audience sensed it, but did not understand it yet. "Ryan," Megan said lightly, attempting to redirect. "Let's keep things moving." He ignored her. "Don't make this awkward," he said, his smile no longer reaching his eyes. He reached for Kayla's arm. The movement was sudden, but not chaotic. It was controlled, deliberate. He grabbed her hard enough to force a reaction. The room froze. Kayla stumbled back a step, more from surprise than force. The microphones picked up the sound of breath leaving her lungs. The cameras caught everything, the grip, the recoil, the moment Ryan lost awareness of the audience entirely. "What is wrong with you?" He hissed the words sharp enough to carry. There was a collective intake of breath. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else raised a phone higher. Kayla did not scream. She did not push him away. She steadied herself and looked at him, not with accusation, but with clarity. She took one step back and lowered her eyes, as if conceding. Ryan mistook it for submission. He raised his hand again. This time the strike was unmistakable. The sound echoed through the atrium. Gasps followed. The live stream chat exploded. Comments scrolled faster than the moderators could react. Kayla staggered, caught herself, and stood still. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. Then Laura Bennett stepped forward. "Stop the stream," she said, her voice firm, carrying authority that did not ask permission. The production team hesitated. The delay was brief, but irreversible. The footage had already been transmitted, mirrored, saved. Michael Rowan moved to Kayla's side, placing himself between her and Ryan without touching either of them. "This event is suspended," he said calmly. "Security." Ryan looked around as if waking from a dream. He saw faces not applauding, not admiring, but watching. "Recording." "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice rising. "She provoked me." No one responded. Kayla reached into her bag and took out her phone. Her hands were steady as she opened her notes app. She typed the time, the location, the exact words she had heard. She did not look at Ryan again. The night did not end with shouting or arrests. It ended with procedure security escorting Ryan away from the stage. Laura speaking quietly with HR staff, Michael issuing instructions to preserve evidence. As Kayla was led to a private room, the room she left behind buzzed with confusion and shock. Conversations overlapped. Phones buzzed. The certainty that had filled the space minutes earlier drained away, replaced by something colder. Ryan had believed the stage belonged to him. He had not noticed that it was also a record. The moment after violence is never loud in the way people expect. It is quiet, disoriented, suspended. Like a room holding its breath while reality rearranges itself. Kayla Garcia sat alone in a small conference room on the 3rd floor of Northvale Systems, the kind of room designed for temporary use. No artwork, no windows. A rectangular table and 4 identical chairs. Someone had brought her water. She had not touched it. Michael Rowan stood near the door, speaking in low, measured tones to a security supervisor. His body language was calm, deliberate, signaling control without aggression. He did not look at Kayla unless necessary. He understood that presence did not always require proximity. Laura Bennett entered a moment later, her tablet held firmly in both hands. She nodded once at Kayla, acknowledgement, not sympathy. "The stream has been terminated," Laura said, "but multiple backups exist. It is preserving all footage under legal hold." Kayla nodded. She already knew. What happens now? Laura asked, not as a demand, but as a procedural checkpoint. Michael answered, "We document. We separate parties. We notify counsel and the board. No statements, no deletions, no improvisation." Laura exhaled slowly. Understood. She turned to Kayla. "I need to ask you a few questions for the incident report. You don't have to answer anything you're not comfortable with." Kayla met her gaze. "I'm comfortable with accuracy," she said. Laura took a seat across from her and opened a form. She asked for time, location, and description. Kayla answered without embellishment. She described the sequence of events in neutral language, focusing on observable actions rather than interpretation. "He reached for my arm," Kayla said. "I stepped back. He struck me." Laura typed steadily. She did not ask why. She did not ask what Kayla felt. She asked whether there were witnesses. Kayla listed names. Laura did not react. Outside the room, Northvale's headquarters was shifting into a different mode. Security redirected guests out of the building. The music was shut off. The lighting was dimmed. What had been a celebration minutes earlier now felt like an evacuation. Ryan Whitmore was escorted to a separate office under the supervision of security. He protested loudly at first, demanding to speak to the board, to HR, to anyone who would listen. His voice echoed down the hallway, sharp with disbelief. "This is being blown out of proportion," he insisted. It was a misunderstanding. No one argued with him. Arguments required engagement. Procedure did not. Michael ensured that Ryan's phone was not confiscated. Confiscation implied accusation, but that all company systems were immediately locked. His badge access was suspended. His email was frozen. His calendar was placed on hold. These were not punishments. They were safeguards. In the IT department, technicians worked quietly, following protocols they rarely needed, but had practiced nonetheless. The live stream file was duplicated and hashed. Server logs were exported. Access permissions were recorded. Nothing was edited. Nothing was erased. Daniel Price stood behind one of the technicians, watching the process unfold. He said nothing. He did not need to. The evidence was assembling itself. Back in the conference room, Laura finished her questions and saved the report. "Medical attention?" she asked. "Yes," Kayla replied. "I'd like it documented." Michael nodded. "I'll arrange it." As they stood to leave, Kayla felt the delayed tremor move through her body. Not panic, not weakness, just the physiological response of adrenaline releasing its grip. She pressed her feet into the floor until the room steadied. The walk to the medical office was quiet. People stepped aside as they passed, some looking away, others staring too intently. Kayla kept her eyes forward. She was not interested in their reactions. At the clinic, a nurse asked routine questions. Kayla answered them precisely. The nurse examined her face, her arm the faint swelling already visible. "This will bruise," the nurse said gently. "I know," Kayla replied. Photographs were taken, measurements noted, time stamped. Outside, Ryan's voice could still be heard intermittently rising and falling as his frustration grew. He demanded to see Kayla. He demanded explanations. He demanded control. None was granted. Laura Bennett convened a brief call with senior HR leadership and Michael Rowan. The board was notified. A special session was scheduled for later that night. The language used was careful legal restraint. Workplace violence incident involving a senior executive. No names yet. No conclusions. Just facts. Ryan was informed that he was to leave the premises. Security escorted him to the exit, not forcefully, but firmly. He continued to speak to justify, to minimize. He told anyone who would listen that this was a private matter, that Kayla was exaggerating. Someone near the door raised a phone and recorded him. Ryan did not notice. Kayla remained at Northvale until the initial procedures were complete. She signed statements. She confirmed contact information. She accepted a printed copy of the incident report and placed it carefully in her folder. Only then did she leave. The night air was cool, sharp against her skin. She paused outside the building, drawing a slow breath. The city hummed around her, indifferent and steady. Michael stood beside her. "You did everything right," he said quietly. Kayla looked at the building once more. "I did what was necessary," she replied. At home, Ryan sent messages in rapid succession. Apologies, accusations, pleas, threats. Kayla did not open them. She forwarded them to a secure folder without reading. She sat at her kitchen table and opened her laptop. The checklist she had prepared days earlier appeared on the screen. Each item had a timestamp. Each had a corresponding file. She checked them off one by one. At 11:14 p.m., her phone buzzed with a message from Michael. "The board has convened. Stand by." Kayla closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. The house was quiet. The silence felt different now, not heavy, not threatening, just empty. She touched her cheek where the bruise was beginning to darken. It hurt, but the pain was contained. It had edges. It could be measured. Ryan had believed the violence would disappear into noise, into embarrassment, into the polite discomfort of witnesses who preferred not to see. He had not accounted for documentation. At 11:47 p.m., another message arrived. "Decision imminent." Kayla did not respond. She did not need reassurance. The process was already in motion. It would move at its own pace, indifferent to protest. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere, Ryan was telling his version of the story, certain that volume would carry him through. Kayla knew better. Power, she understood, did not shout. It recorded. Procedure moved faster than emotion. By the time dawn thinned the darkness outside Northvale Systems, the incident had already been reduced to files, timestamps, and responsibilities. Not because anyone wanted to minimize what had happened, but because procedure was the only thing strong enough to carry it forward without distortion. Kayla Garcia returned to the building early, accompanied by Michael Rowan. She wore the same neutral colors she always did. The bruise on her cheek was visible now, no longer swelling, just present. She had not attempted to conceal it. Concealment suggested shame. Documentation did not. Laura Bennett met them in the lobby, her posture unchanged from the night before. She handed Kayla a printed agenda. "Today will be structured," Laura said. "There will be no surprises." Kayla appreciated that more than reassurance. The first stop was IT. A small group of technicians stood around a monitor displaying a grid of file names. Each entry was labeled with a date, time, and checksum. The live stream footage existed in multiple versions, now raw feed-mirrored copies, internal recordings. None had been edited. None would be. Chain of custody is intact, the lead technician explained. Access logs are preserved. Any attempt to alter the files would be detectable. Michael nodded. Lock them under legal hold. Already done. Kayla watched quietly. She did not need to touch the evidence to know it was there. Knowing where it lived was enough. Next came HR. Laura convened a small meeting in a conference room larger than the one Kayla had occupied the night before. Present were senior HR staff Michael and a representative from security. No one spoke casually. The tone was not tense, it was exact. Laura reviewed the incident report line by line. She asked Kayla to confirm details already documented. Kayla confirmed them. She corrected one minor timestamp. Accuracy mattered. "We will proceed under the workplace violence policy," Laura said. "Given the seniority of the individual involved, all steps will be reviewed by counsel and the board." She paused, then added, "This is not discretionary." Kayla met her eyes. "I understand." Ryan Whitmore's name was not used. Titles were roles, actions. Security provided their report. Who intervened? Who escorted? Who witnessed what? The language was neutral, stripped of opinion. Michael took notes, occasionally interjecting to clarify jurisdictional points. He was careful not to argue. There was nothing to argue about. By mid-morning, the board assembled via secure video conference. Faces appeared on the screen, some familiar, some not. Expressions ranged from grim to guarded. No one smiled. Michael summarized events without embellishment. He referenced files. He cited policies. He played a brief excerpt of the footage, not the strike itself, but the moments leading up to it. Context, not spectacle. Kayla was not asked to speak. She did not volunteer. When questions came, they were procedural: liability exposure, investor communication, interim leadership. Daniel Price spoke briefly, outlining steps already taken to secure financial systems and prevent unauthorized access. His voice was steady. He did not speculate. Ryan's counsel attempted to join the call. Access was denied. The board voted on immediate measures unanimously: temporary suspension of Ryan's duties, continued preservation of evidence, engagement of an independent investigator. No public statements until facts were reviewed. Then came the matter of authority. The deadlock that had lingered for weeks no longer mattered. The clause had already been triggered. Michael presented the authorization. Kayla's name appeared on the screen, typed in a font no one questioned. "This is an interim measure," Michael reminded them, "designed to stabilize operations." One board member asked, "Is she willing?" Kayla looked directly into the camera. "Yes," she said. "One word. Enough." The vote passed. There was no applause, no congratulations, only acknowledgement. After the call ended, Laura exhaled for what felt like the first time that morning. "I'll notify the necessary departments," she said. "Access changes will be implemented immediately." Kayla nodded. "Please ensure Ryan is informed through counsel only." Laura made a note. "Of course." Outside the conference room, Northvale felt different, quieter. Conversation stopped when Kayla passed, then resumed at a lower volume. Some employees looked at her with curiosity, others with something like relief. She did not address any of it. Her office, temporary, unadorned, had been repaired overnight. A desk, a chair, a secure phone. Nothing personal. She appreciated the restraint. Michael lingered at the door. "There will be pressure," he said, "from media, from Ryan." Kayla sat down. "Pressure is predictable." He nodded. "If you need, I'll tell you," she said gently. He left. By noon, Ryan's attempts to contact Kayla intensified. Emails from personal accounts, messages through intermediaries, voicemails alternating between contrition and outrage. Kayla did not listen to them. She forwarded each to Michael's secure inbox. She was not avoiding Ryan. She was refusing to engage outside process. At 1:30 p.m., Laura informed her that Ryan had been formally notified of his suspension and access restrictions. "He's not taking it well," Laura said. Kayla looked up. "That's expected." The independent investigator arrived shortly after, an external firm with no prior ties to Northvale. They requested documents. They requested interviews. Kayla provided access without commentary. When they asked how she wanted to proceed personally, she answered simply, "I want the record to be complete." In the late afternoon, Kayla stepped into the medical clinic again. The bruising had darkened. The nurse documented progression. Kayla signed forms and returned to work. As the day wound down, Megan Shaw's name appeared in Kayla's inbox. A short message. An apology for not intervening sooner. Kayla read it once, then archived it. She did not reply. Apologies without accountability were not her concern. That evening, a draft internal memo circulated. It announced leadership changes without explanation. It emphasized continuity, stability, and respect. Kayla approved it with minor edits. Words mattered. At home, the house felt different. Ryan's presence lingered in objects and habits. Kayla moved through rooms slowly, deliberately. She packed a small bag and placed it by the door, not to leave, but to be ready. She slept lightly again, not from fear, but from awareness. The next morning would bring new challenges. Media inquiries, investor calls, legal filings. Ryan's attempts to regain control would escalate before they faded. Kayla knew that, but she also knew something else now. The moment Ryan had struck her, he had lost more than composure. He had lost credibility, timing, and leverage. Violence had always been his last resort. Procedure was hers. The announcement was delivered without drama, exactly as Kayla Garcia had expected it would be. At 9:00 a.m. the following morning, Laura Bennett convened a brief all-hands virtual meeting. Attendance was mandatory. Cameras were optional. Microphones were muted by default. The email invitation contained no explanation beyond a subject line that read, "Operational Update." Kayla joined from her temporary office. She did not adjust the camera angle or the lighting. She sat upright, hands folded on the desk, her expression neutral. The bruise on her cheek was visible. She had not covered it. Laura appeared on screen first, framed by a blank wall. Her voice was calm, steady, unmistakably professional. "Thank you for joining on short notice," she said. "I'm going to keep this brief." She paused not for effect, but to ensure attention. Effective immediately, Laura continued. "Ryan Whitmore has been suspended from all duties pending an independent investigation. His access to company systems has been revoked." A ripple moved through the grid of faces. Some blinked, some stiffened, some leaned closer to their screens. Laura did not react. "In order to maintain continuity and fulfill our governance obligations," she said, "the board has appointed an interim chief executive officer." She glanced down at her notes once, then looked back at the camera. "Kayla Garcia will assume the role effective today." The silence that followed was complete. No applause, no gasps, just the faint hum of microphones picking up rooms where no one spoke. Kayla remained still. She did not acknowledge the announcement with a nod or a smile. She waited. Laura continued. "This decision follows established procedures outlined in our bylaws. Further communication will be shared as appropriate. Until then, please direct operational questions through standard channels." She ended the meeting without inviting questions. The screen went dark. Kayla exhaled slowly and closed her laptop. The moment had arrived exactly as she had imagined it, not triumphant, not vindicating, simply final. Within minutes, her phone began to ring. Executives, department heads, board liaisons. Kayla let the first wave go to voicemail. She was not avoiding responsibility. She was sequencing it. Michael Rowan entered her office, quietly closing the door behind him. "It's done," he said. "Yes," Kayla replied. "Now we work." Her first directive was short and specific. She authorized Daniel Price to proceed with a comprehensive internal audit unrestricted by department or seniority. She instructed IT to maintain all access restrictions and to log any attempted breaches. She asked Laura to schedule mandatory briefings on workplace conduct and reporting mechanisms. No speeches, no reassurances, just tasks. The response from employees was cautious but attentive. People followed instructions. Questions came in measured tones. The organization, accustomed to hierarchy, adjusted to the shift with surprising efficiency. Ryan's response was less restrained. By midday, his attorney had sent 3 letters, one to the board, one to HR, one to Kayla personally. Each contained a variation of the same argument that the incident was a private marital matter, that the response was disproportionate, that Ryan's reputation had been irreparably harmed. Michael reviewed the letters and filed them appropriately. Kayla did not read them. At 2:00 p.m., Ryan attempted to enter the building. Security stopped him at the front desk. His badge no longer worked. The exchange was brief, captured on a phone by someone waiting in line behind him. Ryan's voice rose. "This is my company," he insisted. The guard responded evenly. "Sir, you need to leave." Ryan left, still speaking, still gesturing, still convinced that volume could reopen doors already sealed by policy. By late afternoon, the first media inquiries arrived. Reporters asked about leadership changes, about the incident, about Kayla herself. The company's statement, approved earlier, was released without alteration. It confirmed the change in leadership and declined to comment further. Kayla approved no interviews. At 5:30 p.m., Daniel Price joined her in the office with preliminary findings. The audit had only begun, but patterns were already emerging: expense approvals that bypassed standard controls, vendor relationships that lacked documentation, reimbursements that blurred personal and professional lines. "I'll need time," Daniel said, "but this won't be difficult to substantiate." Kayla nodded. "Take the time," she said. "Do it cleanly." When he left, she sat alone for a moment, absorbing the weight of the day. The building was quieter now. People had gone home. The hum of activity had softened into something manageable. She thought briefly of Ryan, not with anger, but with distance. He had always believed that control came from dominance, that authority was something you asserted. He had never understood how quickly it evaporated when confronted with evidence. Her phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. "You think you've won it, Red. You've ruined everything." Kayla forwarded it to Michael without reply. At home that evening, she packed a larger bag. Not in haste, not in fear. She arranged documents carefully, placing originals in protective sleeves. She left the house before Ryan returned, locking the door behind her and placing the key on the counter. She did not leave a note. That night, she stayed in a quiet hotel near the city center. The room was anonymous, unremarkable. Exactly what she needed. She slept deeply for the first time in weeks. The next morning, she returned to Northvale early. Laura met her at the elevator with an update. "Ryan has been formally notified of termination proceedings," Laura said, "pending the outcome of the investigation." Kayla nodded. "Thank you." As the day unfolded, the organization began to settle into a new rhythm. Meetings proceeded. Decisions were made. No one mentioned Ryan unless necessary. The absence he left behind was noticeable, but not destabilizing. That afternoon, the board convened again. This time, the mood was different. Less guarded, more resolute. Kayla addressed them briefly. "I'm here to ensure continuity," she said, "not to redefine the company overnight. We will follow process. We will document everything. And we will prioritize safety and integrity." No one objected. When the meeting ended, one board member lingered. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. "You could have stepped back." Kayla met his gaze. "Someone had to step forward," she replied. As she left the room, she passed a group of employees gathered near the elevators. They fell silent as she approached, then one of them spoke. "Thank you," the woman said, her voice low, "for handling it the way you did." Kayla nodded once. "That's how it should be handled," she said. Later, alone in her office, Kayla opened her notes app and reviewed the entries she had made the night of the incident. She read it carefully, then locked the file. The announcement had changed everything. But it had not changed her. She was still quiet, still deliberate, still unwilling to confuse justice with spectacle. The power shift had been real, but it had not been personal. It had been procedural. Numbers did not react to pressure. They did not apologize. They did not justify themselves. They simply existed, waiting to be read correctly. Daniel Price began the audit the way he always did, by assuming nothing and verifying everything. He assembled a small team bound by confidentiality agreements and rotated them through the work in pairs. No single person saw the whole picture at once. That was intentional. Bias thrived in isolation. Kayla Garcia gave him one instruction and no commentary. Follow the data, she said. Don't interpret it yet. The first layer was routine. Expense reports, travel reimbursements, vendor invoices. Nothing that would have raised alarms on its own. Ryan Whitmore had been careful enough to stay within limits most of the time, careful enough to spread irregularities across departments. But patterns emerged quickly when Daniel widened the lens. Ryan's corporate card showed frequent charges clustered around personal milestones, weekend getaways, that coincided with company off-sites meals labeled as client dinners, with no clients-attached transportation expenses that exceeded policy caps, but were consistently approved within minutes of submission. That's odd, one analyst said quietly, pointing at a timestamp. These approvals are faster than the system usually allows. Daniel leaned in. Pull the authorization logs. The logs revealed a habit Ryan had developed over time. He had pressured junior finance staff to pre-approve certain categories under the guise of efficiency. Trust me, he would say. I'll clean it up later. Later never came. Daniel cross-referenced the approvals with email traffic. The language was subtle but consistent. Ryan framed urgency as leadership, questioning as obstruction, compliance as loyalty. None of it was illegal on its own. Together, it told a story. The second layer went deeper. Vendor relationships, consulting fees, retainers paid to firms with vague scopes and no deliverables. Daniel's team traced the payments through shell entities that eventually led back to personal associates of Ryan's friends from business school. A former roommate, a cousin listed as an independent advisor. This isn't sloppiness, Daniel said. It's entitlement. He compiled the findings into a preliminary report and sent it to Michael Rowan under privilege. Kayla received a separate summary stripped of interpretation, just facts, figures, and references. She read it once, then again slower. She did not react. Continue, she wrote back. As the audit expanded, so did the implications. Ryan had authorized reimbursements for legal consultations unrelated to company matters. He had billed travel tied to personal disputes as investor relations. He had used company resources to monitor employees he considered disloyal. Each action was documented. Each was time-stamped. None required conjecture. The independent investigator reviewed Daniel's findings and requested additional data. IT complied. Server logs showed unusual access patterns, Ryan reviewing employee files late at night, downloading documents outside his purview. The investigator asked Kayla if she wished to be present during interviews. No, she said. I don't need to be. She understood something Ryan never had. Truth did not require an audience. By midweek, the board received the first consolidated report. The tone was restrained. The conclusions provisional. The evidence compelling. One board member asked the question everyone had been avoiding. Is this criminal? Michael answered carefully. Some elements may warrant referral. Others are governance failures. We'll let the facts guide that decision. Kayla listened without comment. Outside the boardroom, Ryan's attempts to regain control grew more desperate. He leaked partial narratives to sympathetic contacts, framing himself as the victim of an overreaction. He claimed the audit was retaliatory. He suggested Kayla had orchestrated a coup. The claims circulated briefly, then stalled. Facts traveled slower than rumors, but they traveled farther. Kayla instructed communications to issue no rebuttals. Silence, she knew, was not avoidance. It was refusal to amplify distortion. At home, or what had been home, Ryan continued to send messages. Some were apologetic, some were threatening. Some swung between both within minutes. Kayla's attorney filed for a temporary protective order citing the incident and subsequent communications. The order was granted without a hearing. When Ryan was served, he laughed according to the process server. She's bluffing, he said. He stopped laughing when his bank contacted him the next day. Daniel's audit had uncovered another habit Ryan had cultivated, using company influence to smooth personal finances. Lines of credit extended on favorable terms. Fees waived. Exceptions made quietly. When those relationships learned of his suspension and the pending investigation, the exceptions evaporated. Ryan's accounts were not frozen. They did not need to be. They were simply recalculated. At Northvale, Kayla focused on stability. She met with department heads not to reassure them emotionally, but to clarify expectations. "Work continues," she said. "If you encounter obstacles, document them." Employees responded with something like relief. The absence of drama felt unfamiliar but welcome. One afternoon, an analyst knocked on Kayla's door. The woman looked nervous, clutching a folder. "I wasn't sure who to give this to before," she said. "But I think you should see it." Inside were emails Ryan had sent months earlier, pressuring the analyst to alter projections to support a narrative he preferred. The analyst had refused. Ryan had reassigned her weeks later. Kayla thanked her and forwarded the materials to Michael. She made no promises. As the days passed, the picture became undeniable. Ryan's behavior was not a series of isolated lapses. It was a system built around his needs maintained through intimidation and neglect. The investigator scheduled final interviews. Ryan's counsel submitted a response that focused on intent rather than evidence. It did not help. When the board convened again, the mood was different, not tense, resolved. Michael presented the findings. Daniel answered questions. The investigator summarized conclusions. No one raised their voice. The vote to terminate Ryan Whitmore's employment was unanimous. Kayla did not attend the vote. She learned of the outcome from Michael's message sent without commentary. "It's done." She closed her laptop and sat quietly for a moment. Not to celebrate. To absorb the finality. Termination did not mean erasure. Ryan would continue to exist in the world to tell his version of events. There would be legal proceedings, settlements, footnotes. But his authority, his access to systems to people to silence, was gone. That evening, Kayla walked through the building after most employees had left. She paused at the atrium where the party had taken place days earlier. The space looked ordinary now. Empty, just glass and light. She did not linger. Numbers had done their work. They had not punished. They had not avenged. They had simply told the truth. Evidence did not announce itself all at once. It accumulated quietly, layer by layer, until denial required more effort than acknowledgement. The independent investigator finalized her report on a Thursday afternoon. It was concise, methodical, and unsentimental. Each conclusion was tied to documentation. Each allegation was supported by multiple sources. The report did not speculate about motive. It did not editorialize Ryan Whitmore's character. It described actions, impacts, and risks. Kayla Garcia read it alone. In her office, the door closed, her phone silenced. She moved through the pages slowly, not because the content surprised her, but because she wanted to be precise about what she absorbed. There it was, laid out in neutral language: misuse of corporate funds, abuse of authority, retaliation against employees, and a substantiated incident of workplace violence captured on multiple recordings. The report included appendices, video stills, audio transcripts, email threads, bank records, medical documentation. No single piece was dramatic on its own. Together, they were undeniable. Michael Rowan reviewed the report with the board later that evening. Kayla did not attend. She did not need to. The document spoke more effectively without her presence. When Michael called her afterward, his voice was steady. "The board is referring portions of this to external authorities," he said. "Financial irregularities and the assault." Kayla nodded, though he could not see it. "That's appropriate. They also want to know how you'd like to proceed publicly." Kayla considered the question carefully. "We proceed minimally," she said. "No statements beyond what's required. The record exists. We don't need to narrate it." Michael agreed. "That will frustrate some people." "Yes," Kayla said. "It will." The next morning, Ryan's attorney requested mediation. The request was framed as an opportunity for resolution for discretion, for protecting all parties involved. Kayla declined. Not angrily, not triumphantly. She declined through counsel citing the ongoing investigation and her intent to cooperate fully with authorities. There was nothing more to discuss. Ryan's response was predictable. He posted a vague message online about betrayal and ambition. It was shared, briefly commented on enthusiastically by a small circle, then drowned out by facts he could not control. The videos did not disappear. Despite attempts to suppress them, copies circulated, unaltered, time-stamped, verified. Platforms flagged them as sensitive but did not remove them. They existed now as records, not gossip. Kayla did not watch them again. She focused instead on what came next. Laura Bennett updated HR protocols across the company, implementing changes recommended by the investigator. Mandatory reporting channels were reinforced. Training sessions were scheduled. Anonymous reporting tools were expanded and staffed by external partners. "This isn't about one person," Laura said during a leadership briefing. "It's about making sure silence is never the safest option." Kayla approved the measures without modification. Employees began to speak up. Not loudly, not all at once, but steadily. A manager admitted he had ignored complaints because Ryan had intimidated him. An assistant disclosed being pressured to alter documents. A junior analyst described a meeting where Ryan had threatened her career for disagreeing with him. Each account was documented. Each was treated seriously. No one was punished for coming forward. The culture began to shift, not dramatically, but perceptibly. Conversations changed. People paused before dismissing concerns. Policies that had once felt theoretical became real. Kayla observed the changes with cautious attention. She knew systems could revert as easily as they could reform. Consistency mattered. Outside Northvale, the legal process advanced without spectacle. Prosecutors reviewed evidence. Financial regulators requested documentation. Ryan's attorneys filed motions that delayed but did not derail proceedings. Kayla cooperated fully. She attended meetings when required. She provided statements when asked. She did not speculate or advocate beyond the facts. At no point did she offer commentary on Ryan's intentions or character. She described what had happened and when. That was enough. One afternoon, as she prepared to leave the office, Kayla received a call from a number she did not recognize. "I shouldn't be calling you," the woman said, her voice hesitant. "But I wanted to thank you." Kayla listened. "I left Northvale last year," the woman continued. "Ryan was difficult. I told myself it wasn't that bad. Seeing what happened, seeing it handled the way it was, it mattered." Kayla thanked her for calling. She did not ask for details. She did not promise anything. When the call ended, she sat quietly for a moment before standing. The workday ended early that evening. Kayla walked out of the building alone, the atrium dim and echoing. The space no longer felt charged. It felt neutral. At her hotel, she packed her things carefully. She had been living out of temporary spaces for weeks, always prepared to move again, if necessary. That would change soon. Michael informed her that Ryan's counsel had accepted the termination terms. Severance would be limited, contingent on non-disclosure regarding company matters. Ryan had objected. He had little leverage left. The protective order remained in place. Ryan had attempted to contact Kayla through intermediaries twice more. Both attempts were documented. Both were added to the file. Kayla's personal life remained quiet. She did not attend social events. She did not give interviews. She did not respond to speculation. Some people mistook her silence for coldness. They were wrong. Silence, she knew, was not the absence of feeling. It was the discipline of not turning pain into performance. As the investigation concluded and referrals were made, the company began discussing long-term leadership. Kayla participated in those conversations reluctantly. She had never intended to stay. When asked if she would consider remaining CEO permanently, she answered honestly, "Only until the transition is complete." The board respected that. They began the search process immediately. On a Friday afternoon, Kayla visited the medical clinic one last time. The bruises had faded. The documentation was complete. She signed the final form and thanked the staff. Walking back to her car, she felt something shift internally, not relief exactly, but release. The vigilance she had maintained for so long began to loosen. Ryan's name would continue to appear in documents and proceedings and memories. He would not disappear. But his power over her life had ended, not because she had defeated him, because she had refused to protect him from the consequences of his actions. As she drove away, Kayla glanced once at the skyline, then focused on the road ahead. There was still work to do at Northvale, and within herself. But the hardest part was over. The evidence had been heard. Ryan Whitmore's last strategy was not legal. It was narrative. When the formal processes stopped bending in his favor, when documents and procedures closed every door he tried to force open, he turned to the one arena he still believed he could dominate public perception. The shift was subtle at first. An interview request floated to a business podcast that specialized in leadership under fire. A former colleague began asking questions on his behalf, testing reactions. A carefully worded op-ed draft circulated privately, framing Ryan as a casualty of corporate overcorrection. None of it named Kayla Garcia directly. The Kayla understood was deliberate. By keeping the language abstract, miscommunication, private conflict, career rivalry, Ryan hoped to blur lines that had been carefully drawn in ink and timestamps. He wanted to turn procedure into opinion evidence, into debate. Kayla did nothing. Her legal team monitored the attempts and logged them. Michael Rowan advised restraint, not because counterstatements would be ineffective, but because they would be unnecessary. "Let him talk," Michael said during a brief check-in. "Every word he says outside counsel becomes part of the record." Ryan talked. He spoke about stress, about pressure, about the expectations placed on high-performing executives. He spoke about betrayal without specifying by whom. He implied motives without naming actions. The response was underwhelming. The audience he sought was smaller than he believed. Curiosity flickered, then faded. Commentators asked for details he could not provide. Others referenced the publicly confirmed facts and moved on. Ryan had mistaken attention for influence. Inside Northvale Systems, Kayla focused on internal clarity. She convened small group sessions, not town halls, not speeches where employees could ask procedural questions anonymously. The purpose was not catharsis. It was orientation. What happens if someone reports a concern now? One question read. Kayla answered plainly. It's logged, it's reviewed, and it's protected. Another question followed. What if the concern involves leadership? Kayla did not hesitate. Then it's reviewed by someone outside that leadership chain. The simplicity of the answers was disarming. Laura Bennett oversaw the rollout of new reporting mechanisms, partnering with an external firm to ensure independence. Training sessions were mandatory, not symbolic. Attendance was tracked, completion mattered. For the first time in years, employees noticed that policies were being enforced in the same way they were written. The change was not dramatic, but it was real. Meanwhile, the legal process advanced methodically. Ryan's attempts to challenge the protective order failed. The court found sufficient evidence to maintain it pending further review. He was instructed to cease all direct and indirect contact with Kayla. He complied publicly. Privately, he tested boundaries. A mutual acquaintance reached out, asking Kayla if she would consider closure. Kayla declined through counsel. The message was added to the file. Another intermediary suggested mediation for emotional resolution. Kayla declined again. She did not owe Ryan resolution. She owed herself safety. The investigators completed their referrals. Financial regulators opened a preliminary inquiry. Law enforcement reviewed the assault documentation and recordings. Decisions moved slowly, as they always did, but they moved forward. Kayla was asked whether she wanted to press further charges. She considered the question carefully. "I want the facts to stand," she said. "Whatever follows them, follows." It was not a refusal. It was not a demand. It was a statement of principle. At Northvale, the search for a permanent CEO progressed. Candidates were vetted quietly, thoroughly. Kayla participated in interviews, only when necessary, offering insight into organizational needs rather than personal preferences. One candidate asked her directly, "Why did you step into this role?" Kayla answered honestly, "Because the system required someone to." "And why step away now?" he asked. "Because systems work best when they don't depend on exceptions," she said. The board respected that answer. As her interim tenure neared its end, Kayla prepared a transition memo. It was detailed, procedural, and devoid of commentary. It outlined what had changed, what was still in progress, and what required continued attention. She did not include Ryan's name. The past did not need repetition. In her personal life, Kayla began to reclaim small routines. Morning walks without checking exits, meals eaten slowly, evenings without contingency plans. The vigilance that had once been necessary began to recede. One evening, as she left the office, she encountered Daniel Price in the lobby. He hesitated, then spoke. "I wanted to say something," he said. "I should have pushed harder earlier. I saw things. I didn't connect them." Kayla considered him. "You're pushing now," she said. "That's what matters." He nodded, visibly relieved. Ryan's public narrative reached its final form a week later, a long post shared on a professional networking site framed as a reflection on leadership and laws. It avoided specifics. It implied injustice. The response was quiet. A few supportive comments appeared. More people scrolled past. The platform moved on. Ryan had run out of stages. Kayla read the post once, not out of curiosity, but to understand its shape. Then she closed the page and did not return. On her last day as interim CEO, the board held a brief meeting to mark the transition. There were polite words, restrained appreciation, no ceremony. The new CEO would begin the following Monday. As Kayla cleared her office, she paused once, looking at the empty desk. It felt appropriate that it was unadorned. She had never been there to occupy space, only to hold it until it was safe to release. She handed her badge to Laura Bennett in the hallway. "Thank you," Laura said quietly. Kayla nodded. "Take care of the process," she replied. "I will." Outside, the air was warm. The city moved as it always had, indifferent to corporate upheaval and personal reckonings alike. Kayla walked away from Northvale Systems without looking back. Ryan Whitmore would continue to tell his story, adjusting details to fit his needs. Courts and regulators would decide which parts mattered. Kayla did not need the ending to be dramatic. She needed it to be true. The hearing did not take place in a courtroom. There were no benches, no raised voices, no spectators leaning forward for resolution. It happened in a boardroom, stripped of branding with neutral walls, and a long table polished to the point of reflection. The kind of room designed to make emotion feel out of place. Kayla Garcia sat at one end, hands folded, posture straight. Michael Rowan sat beside her, a legal pad, open pen, resting but unused. Across from them were members of the board's disciplinary committee, joined by representatives from the independent investigative firm and outside counsel retained for procedural integrity. Ryan Whitmore was not present. His absence was intentional. Under the terms of the protective order and counsel's advice, he had submitted a written statement instead. 12 pages carefully worded, dense with qualifications and deflections. The committee had read it in advance. The hearing began precisely on time. The chair outlined the purpose in neutral language to review findings, to assess governance breaches, and to determine final actions consistent with company policy and fiduciary duty. There was no mention of personal relationships. None was needed. Michael spoke first. He did not dramatize. He did not moralize. He walked the committee through a timeline supported by exhibits already in their possession, financial records, access logs, internal communications policy violations, and the documented incident of workplace violence. Each point was referenced. Each citation was numbered. Kayla was asked only one question. "Do you affirm, that the documentation submitted accurately reflects your experience and observations? Yes, she said. That was it. The investigator summarized her conclusions next. She spoke about patterns, how authority had been leveraged to bypass controls, how retaliation had silenced objections, how informal pressure had replaced formal process. This was not a failure of one policy, she said. It was a failure to enforce many. The committee listened without interruption when the written statement from Ryan's counsel was addressed. The contrast was stark. The document focused on intense stress and misunderstanding. It framed the incident as isolated. It emphasized past performance and projected value. One committee member asked a single question of counsel. Which of these facts do you dispute? The answer was indirect. Another member leaned forward. Then the issue is an ambiguity, she said. It's accountability. There was no argument after that. The committee recessed briefly. When they returned, the chair read the decision. Ryan Whitmore's employment was formally terminated for cause. His severance was revoked under the morality and conduct clauses of his contract. The findings would be shared as required with regulatory authorities and law enforcement. The company would cooperate fully with any resulting inquiries. No one reacted visibly. The decision was not a climax. It was a conclusion. Kayla felt no surge of satisfaction, only a quiet sense of alignment, as if a long dislocated joint had finally been set. After the hearing, Michael gathered his papers and turned to her. "It's over," he said. Kayla nodded. "For the company," she replied. "For you," he added. She considered that. "It's ending," she said carefully. "That's different." The legal proceedings outside North Vale moved at their own pace. Charges were considered. Filings were made. Hearings were scheduled. Kayla attended those she was required to attend and declined the rest through counsel. She answered questions with the same precision she had used from the beginning. Dates, actions, consequences. She did not speculate about Ryan's motives. She did not describe her pain. Pain, she understood, was not evidence. At one hearing, Ryan appeared briefly via video link. His image flickered onto a screen thinner, less controlled. He avoided looking directly at the camera. Kayla did not look at him at all. The judge addressed procedural matters, then adjourned. The screen went dark. The room exhaled. Outside, reporters waited. Kayla exited through a side door with Michael and her attorney. No statements were given. Silence again was not avoidance. It was discipline. In the weeks that followed, Kayla began the process of disentangling the last threads of her marriage. The paperwork was substantial but straightforward. Assets were divided, accounts separated. The protective order remained in effect. Ryan contested some term. Those contests failed. There were moments unexpected, uninvited, when memory intruded. A familiar gesture, a phrase overheard in passing, a reflexive tightening at raised voices. Kayla acknowledged those moments without indulging them. Healing, she had learned, did not require reliving. One afternoon, she met with her attorney to sign the final documents. The office was quiet, the windows open to let in the late summer air. "This is the last one," the attorney said, sliding the papers across the table. Kayla read them carefully, line by line. Then she signed. When she stood to leave, the attorney hesitated. "If you need anything, I know," Kayla said gently. "Thank you." She walked out into the sunlight and paused, feeling its warmth on her face. The world had not changed, but her place in it had. At North Vale Systems, the new CEO settled into the role. The transition Kayla had managed held. Policies were enforced, reporting channels were used. The company's culture shifted incrementally, not through slogans, but through consistency. Occasionally, Kayla received updates from Laura Bennett or Daniel Price. Brief messages, progress notes. She read them, replied when necessary, and then returned to her own life. Ryan's name appeared less frequently. When it did, it was in legal filings or regulatory notices. Never again in context that granted him authority. One evening, Kayla sat alone on her balcony, a mug of tea cooling beside her. The city lights sun stretched out below, indifferent and enduring. She thought about the woman she had been when she started documenting, when she first realized that silence could be strategic. She thought about the cost of weighting the risk of staying. She did not regret her choices. They had been made with clarity, not fear. The hearing had not restored anything that had been taken. It had not erased harm or rewritten the past. What it had done was draw a line. On one side of that line was behavior that thrived on intimidation and obscurity. On the other was a process slow, imperfect, but steady. Kayla had crossed that line quietly, and she did not intend to cross back. Leaving a marriage did not feel like leaving a building. There was no single door, no moment when Kayla Garcia stepped outside and knew she would never return. It was a process of unthreading, careful, methodical, sometimes tedious. Each form signed, each account separated, each address changed, removed one more strand that had once held her in place. The legal end came quietly. The final decree arrived by email on a Tuesday morning. No hearing, no speeches, just a document attached with a subject line that read, "Final judgment entered." Kayla opened it, reviewed the pages, and saved a copy to the same folder that already contained years of careful documentation. She did not print it. Papers suggested ceremony. This did not require one. She closed her laptop and sat for a moment, hands resting on the table. The room was still. The absence of noise felt earned. Ryan Whitmore was no longer her husband. The words did not land with relief or sorrow. They landed with accuracy. The relationship had ended long before the paperwork caught up to it. The protective order remained in effect. Ryan did not contest it again. He had learned finally that persistence did not equal leverage. Contact ceased. Intermediaries stopped reaching out. The quiet that followed was not the kind that waited for another outburst. It was stable. Kayla moved into a new apartment across town. It was modest, bright, and anonymous. She chose it for its light and its proximity to a park, not for its prestige. The lease was in her name only. The mailbox held no inherited expectations. On the first night there, she unpacked only what she needed: clothes, documents, a few books. She left the rest in boxes stacked neatly against a wall. There was no urgency. She had learned to move at her own pace. The next morning, she walked the neighborhood early, noticing small details she had once overlooked. How the light caught on windows, the sound of traffic softened by distance, the rhythm of people moving without knowing her story. She breathed more slowly than she had in years. At Northvale Systems, life continued without her presence. The new CEO made changes incrementally, building on the foundation Kayla had left. Laura Bennett sent occasional updates, policy compliance rates, training completion numbers, notes on employee feedback. Kayla read them with interest but not attachment. She had never wanted ownership, only alignment. Daniel Price reached out once, inviting her for coffee. They met on neutral ground, a cafe neither of them frequented before. "You changed how we work," he said, not as praise, but as observation. Kayla stirred her coffee. "I enforced what was already written," she replied. Daniel nodded. "That's rarer than it should be." They spoke briefly about audit findings, about systems and controls. They did not speak about Ryan. There was nothing left to say. Kayla's days began to develop a new structure. She took consulting work selectively, choosing projects that valued clarity over speed. She declined invitations that framed her story as inspiration. She was not interested in being a symbol. When asked why, she answered simply, "I prefer accuracy." There were moments when memory surfaced unexpectedly. A loud laugh in a restaurant, a hand gripping a wrist in a crowd, the echo of a voice raised in irritation. These moments arrived without warning and left without ceremony. Kayla did not fight them. She acknowledged them, named them, and let them pass. Avoidance, she knew, only gave memory more space than it deserved. One afternoon, she returned to the medical clinic to request copies of records for her personal archive. The nurse recognized her and smiled gently. "You look different," the nurse said. Kayla considered the comment. "I feel quieter," she replied. The nurse nodded as if that explained everything. In the legal sphere, Ryan's situation progressed predictably. Financial regulators issued notices. Proceedings moved forward. The assault case followed its own timeline, measured and deliberate. Kayla participated when required and stepped back when she could. She never attended hearings alone, not out of fear, but because she no longer needed to prove independence through endurance. On a warm evening in early autumn, Kayla attended a small gathering at a friend's apartment. It was informal, no speeches, no cameras. Someone played music softly in the background. At one point, a woman she had just met asked what she did. "I work with systems," Kayla said. "What kind?" the woman asked. "The kind that fail quietly," Kayla replied, then smiled faintly. "And the kind that can be fixed." The conversation moved on. Kayla did not explain further. She did not need to. As weeks passed, the vigilance that had once governed her days continued to loosen. She no longer checked exits automatically. She no longer scanned rooms for shifts in mood. Her body began to trust the absence of threat. Trust, she discovered, returned slowly. It did not announce itself. It appeared in small decisions, leaving her phone on the table, walking without rehearsing responses, sleeping through the night. One evening, she unpacked the remaining boxes. She sorted through objects that carried memory without meaning, gifts, chosen under obligation, clothes worn for appearances. She donated what she did not need. She kept what felt neutral. At the bottom of one box, she found the folder she had carried to the promotion party, the one she had hoped not to open. The papers inside were now archived digitally, no longer necessary in physical form. She considered discarding it. Instead, she placed it on a shelf, unhidden but unused. It did not symbolize trauma. It symbolized preparedness. There was a difference. Near the end of the month, Laura Bennett sent one last message. "We close the final policy review today. Reporting is up. Retaliation complaints are down." Kayla replied with 2 words. "Good work." She closed her email and turned her attention back to the book she was reading. The story unfolded at its own pace, unconnected to corporate timelines or legal schedules. Later that night, Kayla stepped onto her balcony. The city hummed softly below. She wrapped a light jacket around herself and leaned against the railing, watching the lights shift as cars passed. She thought about the way her life had narrowed and then widened again. About how quiet had once been a strategy and was now simply a state. Ryan Whitmore no longer occupied her thoughts. When he did appear, it was as a fact, not a force. She did not feel victorious. She felt intact. The end of the marriage had not returned what had been taken. It had not erased harm or rewritten memory. What it had done was remove an ongoing threat. It had allowed her to live without bracing. Kayla stayed on the balcony until the air cooled, then went inside and closed the door gently behind her. Not as a defense. As a choice. Kayla Garcia did not mark the end with a date. There was no final hearing circled on a calendar, no definitive email announcing that everything was complete. Endings, she had learned, rarely arrived as single events. They settled gradually like sediment until the water ran clear again. By late autumn, the systems she had stabilized no longer needed her attention. Northvale Systems had a permanent CEO in place, someone competent, cautious, and uninterested in shortcuts. The reporting channels functioned, audits continued on schedule. The company moved forward without revisiting the crisis that had briefly defined it. That Kayla believed was the measure of success. She declined an invitation to attend the annual leadership summit. Not out of resentment or fatigue, but because presence implies ownership. Her work there had been transitional. Lingering would have suggested otherwise. Instead, she spent her days quietly, deliberately assembling a life that no longer revolved around anticipation or defense. Consulting projects filled her mornings. Long walks filled her afternoons. Evenings belonged to books, to music played low, to the ordinary comfort of a routine chosen rather than enforced. People occasionally recognized her name. At first, that unsettled her. Recognition carried expectations, explanations, narratives she had no interest in correcting or confirming. Over time, it faded. She became known not for what had happened, but for how she worked. Calm, precise, reliable. Clients valued her ability to see structural flaws before they became crises. They valued her refusal to dramatize. When asked about leadership under pressure, she answered with restraint. Pressure reveals what systems tolerate, she said. Fix the tolerance and the behavior follows. Ryan Whitmore's legal matters moved toward resolution. Financial penalties were assessed. Restrictions imposed. The assault case concluded without spectacle, anchored in documentation and testimony rather than argument. Kayla was not present for the final decisions. She read about them afterward briefly, then closed the file. The outcomes mattered only insofar as they confirmed what she already knew: consequences existed even when delayed. The knowledge did not bring satisfaction. It brought closure of a specific kind, the kind that does not reopen. One afternoon, Kayla received a handwritten note, forwarded from Northvale's HR department. It was from an employee. She had never met someone who had joined the company after her departure. "I don't know you," the note read, "but I know the systems you put in place. They made it easier for me to speak up. Thank you." Kayla read the note once, then placed it in a drawer. She did not frame it. Gratitude, she believed, did not require display. As winter approached, she began to notice how much lighter her days felt. Not in a celebratory sense, but in the absence of weight she had grown accustomed to carrying. The constant calculation, how to phrase things, where to stand, when to anticipate anger, had quietly disappeared. Her body responded before her mind did. She slept more deeply. She laughed without checking herself. She allowed moments of silence to remain unfilled. One evening, she met a friend for dinner at a small restaurant tucked away from busy streets. The conversation drifted easily, touching on books, travel, trivial irritations. At one point, her friend paused. "You seem settled," she said. Kayla considered the word. "I am," she replied. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd spoken up earlier?" the friend asked gently. Kayla did not bristle. She had asked herself the same question many times. "I think about whether it would have changed the outcome," she said. "I don't think it would have. Only the timing." Her friend nodded, understanding without pressing further. Later that night, Kayla walked home alone, the air sharp with cold. She moved through familiar streets without scanning for threat, without rehearsing explanations. The city existed around her, indifferent and alive. She thought about the moment on the stage, the cameras, the silence, the sudden clarity. She did not replay it with anger or regret. It had become in her mind a point on a longer line. Not the climax, not the beginning, just the moment when preparation met inevitability. Kayla had not exposed Ryan Whitmore. He had exposed himself. She had simply refused to look away. In the weeks that followed, she finalized the last administrative details of her previous life. Closed accounts, archived documents, updated records. Each action was small, unremarkable, necessary. On a quiet Sunday morning, she sorted through digital files and found the first note she had ever written documenting Ryan's behavior. It was brief, tentative, almost apologetic. She read it once, then moved it to a long-term archive. She did not delete it. Erasure suggested denial. Preservation acknowledged reality without reliving it. Her balcony became a place she returned to often. She liked the view at dusk when the city lights flickered on one by one. It reminded her that systems, cities, companies' lives were built from countless small, unseen decisions. Change did not arrive with fanfare. It arrived because someone noticed where things were failing and chose not to normalize it. Kayla never described herself as strong. Strength implied force-resistant struggle. What she had practiced was endurance paired with clarity, quiet strength. It did not shout. It did not demand recognition. It held its ground until the noise exhausted itself. On the final evening of the year, Kayla stood at her window as fireworks began to scatter light across the sky. She watched them without emotion, neither drawn in nor dismissive. Celebration, she knew, was optional. She turned away from the window and closed the blinds, returning to the book she had left open on the table. The story continued unbothered by spectacle. Her phone buzzed once, a calendar reminder she had set months earlier, back when everything still felt provisional. Review goals. Kayla smiled faintly and dismissed it. Goals belonged to futures shaped by urgency. Her life no longer required one. She had left with dignity. Not loudly, not dramatically, just completely. What this story leaves us with is not the image of a fall, but the shape of a choice. Kayla Garcia did not win because she spoke louder, struck back, or exposed someone with spectacle. She prevailed because she understood something many people are never taught. Silence can be strategic, and patience can be power. In a world that often rewards the loudest voice in the room, she chose accuracy over volume, preparation over reaction, and truth over performance. Her journey reminds us that injustice does not always look dramatic at first. Sometimes it hides inside routines, inside jokes, inside systems that quietly excuse harm, because confronting it feels inconvenient. And often the hardest part is not enduring the harm, but resisting the pressure to normalize it. Kayla did not wait for someone to save her. She did not wait for perfect timing or public sympathy. She documented. She learned the rules. She trusted that process, when respected and followed, can outlast cruelty. And when the moment came, when the truth could no longer be contained, she did not celebrate. She simply stepped aside and let consequences do their work. This story is not about revenge. It is about dignity. It is about understanding that leaving with integrity is more powerful than staying to be proven right. It is about knowing that you do not owe explanations to those who refuse to listen, nor forgiveness to those who never took responsibility. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever stayed silent, not because you were weak, but because you were waiting for the right moment? Have you ever chosen patience over confrontation, or truth over approval? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share what this story meant to you in the comments, and let us know where you're watching from and your local time. It reminds us that these lessons travel far beyond one place or one life. And if you believe in stories about quiet strength, legal justice, and walking away with dignity, consider subscribing to the channel. Not for drama, but for stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark.